affairs.
Well, he's funding the war that you're fighting, so I would think that would be memorable.
Well, yes, he funds, but I talked to him before the special military operation, of course. And I said to him then, by the way, I will not go into details, I never do, but I said to him then, I believe that you are making a huge mistake of historic proportions by supporting everything that is happening there, in Ukraine, by pushing Russia away. I told him repeatedly, by the way. I think that would be correct if I stop here.
What did he say?
Ask him, please. It is easier for you. You are a citizen of the United States. Go and ask him. It is not appropriate for me to comment on our conversation.
But you haven't spoken to him since before February of 2022.
No, we haven't spoken. Certain contacts are being maintained, though. Speaking of which, do you remember what I told you about my proposal to work together on a missile defense system?
Yeah.
You can ask all of them. All of them are safe and sound, thank God. The former president, Condoleezza, is safe and sound, and I think Mr. Gates and the current director of the intelligence agency, Mr. Burns, the then ambassador to Russia, in my opinion, are very successful ambassador. They were all witnesses to these conversations. Ask them. Same here. If you are interested in what Mr. President Biden responded to me, ask him. At any rate, I talked to him about it.
I'm definitely interested, but from the outside, it seems like this could devolve or evolve into something that brings the entire world into conflict and could initiate a nuclear launch. And so why don't you just call Biden and say, let's work this out?
What's there to work out? It's very simple. I repeat. We have contacts through various agencies. I will tell you what we are saying on this matter and what we are conveying to the US leadership. If you really want to stop fighting, you need to stop supplying weapons. It will be over within a few weeks. That's it. And then we can agree on some terms. Before you do that, stop. What's easier? Why would I call him? What should I talk to him about? Or beg him for what?
And what messages do you get back?
You're going to deliver such and such weapons to Ukraine. Oh, I'm afraid, please don't. What is there to talk about?
Do you think NATO is worried about this becoming a global war or a nuclear conflict?
At least that's what they're talking about. And they're trying to intimidate their own population with an imaginary Russian threat. This is an obvious fact. And thinking people, not Philistines, but thinking people, analysts, those who are engaged in real politics, just smart people, understand perfectly well that this is a fake. They're trying to fuel the Russian threat.
The threat I think you're referring to is a Russian invasion of Poland, Latvia, expansionist behavior. Can you imagine a scenario where you sent Russian troops to Poland?
Only in one case, if Poland attacks Russia. Why? Because we have no interest in Poland, Latvia, or anywhere else. Why would we do that? We simply don't have any interest. It's just threat mongering.
Well, the argument, I know you know this, is that, well, he invaded Ukraine, he has territorial aims across the continent, and you're saying unequivocally you don't.
It is absolutely out of the question. You just don't have to be any kind of analyst. It goes against common sense to get involved in some kind of a global war. And a global war will bring all humanity to the brink of destruction. It's obvious. There are certainly means of deterrence. They have been scaring everyone with us all along. Tomorrow Russia will use tactical nuclear weapons. Tomorrow Russia will use that. No, the day after tomorrow. So what? In order to extort additional money from US taxpayers and European taxpayers in the confrontation with Russia in the Ukrainian theater of war. The goal is to weaken Russia as much as possible.
One of our senior United States senators from the state of New York, Chuck Schumer, said yesterday, I believe, that we have to continue to fund the Ukrainian effort, or U.S. soldiers, citizens could wind up fighting there. How do you assess that?
This is a provocation, and a cheap provocation at that. I do not understand why American soldiers should fight in Ukraine. There are mercenaries from the United States there. The bigger number of mercenaries comes from Poland, with mercenaries from the United States in second place, and mercenaries from Georgia in third place. Well, if somebody has the desire to send regular troops, that would certainly bring humanity to the brink of very serious global conflict. This is obvious. Do the United States need this? What for? Thousands of miles away from your national territory. Don't you have anything better to do? You have issues on the border, issues with migration, issues with the national debt, more than $33 trillion. You have nothing better to do, so you should fight in Ukraine? Wouldn't it be better to negotiate with Russia? Make an agreement, already understanding the situation that is developing today, realizing that Russia will fight for its interests to the end? And realizing this, actually return to common sense, start respecting our country and its interests, and look for certain solutions. It seems to me that this is much smarter and more rational.
Who blew up Nord Stream?
You for sure.
I was busy that day. Nate, do you have I did not blow up Nord Stream. Thank you, though.
You personally may have an alibi, but the CIA has no such alibi.
Do you have evidence that NATO or the CIA did it?
You know, I won't get into details, but people always say in such cases, look for someone who is interested. But in this case, we should not only look for someone who is interested, but also for someone who has capabilities. Because there may be many people interested, but not all of them are capable of sinking to the bottom of the Baltic Sea and carrying out this explosion. These two components should be connected. Who is interested and who is capable of doing it?
But I'm confused. I mean, that's the biggest act of industrial terrorism ever, and it's the largest emission of CO2 in history. Okay, so if you had evidence, and presumably given your security services, your intel services, you would, that NATO, the US, CIA, the West, did this, why wouldn't you present it and win a propaganda victory?
In the war of propaganda, it is very difficult to defeat the United States, because the United States controls all the world's media and many European media. The ultimate beneficiary of the biggest European media are American financial institutions. Don't you know that? So it is possible to get involved in this work, but it is cost prohibitive, so to speak. We can simply shine the spotlight on our sources of information, and we will not achieve results. It is clear to the whole world what happened, and even American analysts talk about it directly. It's true.
Yes, but here's a question you may be able to answer. You worked in Germany, famously. The Germans clearly know that their NATO partner did this, and it damaged their economy greatly. It may never recover. Why are they being silent about it? That's very confusing to me. Why wouldn't the Germans say something about it?
This also confuses me. But today's German leadership is guided by the interests of the collective West rather than its national interests. Otherwise, it is difficult to explain the logic of their action or inaction. After all, it is not only about Nord Stream 1, which was blown up, and the Nord Stream 2 was damaged, but one pipe is safe and sound and gas can be supplied to Europe through it. But Germany does not open it. We are ready, please. There's another route through Poland called Yamal Europe, which also allows for large flow. Poland has closed it, but Poland pecks from the German hand. It receives money from the pan-European funds, and Germany is the main donor to these pan-European funds. Germany feeds Poland to a certain extent, and they close their route to Germany. Why? I don't understand. Ukraine, to which the Germans supply weapons and give money. Germany is the second sponsor of the United States in terms of financial aid to Ukraine. There are two gas routes through Ukraine. They simply closed one route. The Ukrainians open the second route and please get gas from Russia. They do not open it. Why don't the Germans say, look guys, we give you money and weapons, open up the valve, please, let the gas from Russia pass through for us. We're buying liquefied gas at exorbitant prices in Europe, which brings the level of our competitiveness and economy in general down to zero. So you want us to give you money? Let us have the decent existence. Make money for our economy, because this is where the money we give you comes from. They refuse to do so. Why? Ask them. That is what is like in their heads. Those are highly incompetent people.
Well, maybe the world is breaking into two hemispheres, one with cheap energy, the other without. And I want to ask you that. If we're now a multipolar world, obviously we are, can you describe the blocks of alliances? Who is in each side, do you think?
Listen, you have said that the world is breaking into two hemispheres. The human brain is divided into two hemispheres. One is responsible for one type of activities, the other one is more about creativity and so on. But it is still one and the same head. The world should be a single whole. Security should be shared rather than meant for the golden billion. That is the only scenario where the world could be stable, sustainable, and predictable. Until then, while the head is split in two parts, it is an illness, a serious adverse condition. It is a period of severe disease that the world is going through now. But I think that thanks to honest journalism, this work is akin to work of the doctors. This could somehow be remedied.
Well, let's just give one example, the US dollar, which has kind of divided the world in a lot of ways, maybe not to your advantage, but certainly ours. Is that going away as the reserve currency, the common universally accepted currency? How have sanctions, do you think, changed the dollar's place in the world?
You know, to use the dollar as a tool of foreign policy struggle is one of the biggest strategic mistakes made by the US political leadership. The dollar is the cornerstone of the United States power. I think everyone understands very well that no matter how many dollars are printed, they are quickly dispersed all over the world. Inflation in the United States is minimal. It's about 3 or 3.4%, which is, I think, totally acceptable for the US. But they won't stop printing. What does the debt of $33 trillion tell us about? It is about the emission. Nevertheless, it is the main weapon used by the United States to preserve its power across the world. As soon as the political leadership decided to use the US dollar as a tool of political struggle, a blow was dealt to this American power. I would not like to use any strong language, but it is a stupid thing to do and a grave mistake. Look at what is going on in the world. Even the United States allies are now downsizing their dollar reserves. Seeing this, everyone starts looking for ways to protect themselves. But the fact that the United States applies restrictive measures to certain countries, such as placing restrictions on transactions, freezing assets, etc., causes great concern and sends a signal to the whole world. What did we have here? Until 2022, about 80% of Russian foreign trade transactions were made in US dollars and euros. US dollars accounted for approximately 50% of our transactions with third countries, while currently it is down to 13%. It wasn't us who banned the use of the US dollar. We had no such intention. It was decision of the United States to restrict our transactions in US dollars. I think it is complete foolishness from the point of view of the interests of the United States itself and its taxpayers, as it damages the US economy, undermines the power of the United States across the world. By the way, our transactions in yuan accounted for about 3%. Today, 34% of our transactions are made in rubles, and about as much, a little over 34% in yuan. Why did the United States do this? My only guess is self-conceit. They probably thought it would lead to full collapse, but nothing collapsed. Moreover, other countries, including oil producers, are thinking of and already accepting payments for oil in yuan. Do you even realize what is going on or not? Does anyone in the United States realize this? What are you doing? You're cutting yourself off. All experts say this. Ask any intelligent and thinking person in the United States what the dollar means for the US. You're killing it with your own hands.
I think that's I think that's a fair assessment. The question is what comes next, and maybe you trade one colonial power for another, much less sentimental and forgiving colonial power. I mean, is the BRICS, for example, in danger of being completely dominated by the Chinese economy in a way that's not good for their sovereignty? Do you worry about that?
Well, we have heard those boogeyman stories before. It is a boogeyman story. We're neighbors with China. You cannot choose neighbors just as you cannot choose close relatives. We share a border of 1,000 kilometers with them. This is number one. Second, we have a centuries-long history of coexistence. We're used to it. Third, China's foreign policy philosophy is not aggressive. Its idea is to always look for compromise, and we can see that. The next point is as follows. We are always told the same boogeyman story, and here it goes again. Through an euphemistic form, but it is still the same boogeyman story. The cooperation with China keeps increasing. The pace at which China's cooperation with Europe is growing is higher and greater than that of the growth of Chinese-Russian cooperation. Ask Europeans, aren't they afraid? They might be, I don't know. But they are still trying to access China's market at all costs, especially now that they are facing economic problems. Chinese businesses are also exploring the European market. Do Chinese businesses have small presence in the United States? Yes, the political decisions are such that they are trying to limit their cooperation with China. It is to your own detriment, Mr. Tucker, that you are limiting cooperation with China. You are hurting yourself. It is a delicate matter, and there are no silver bullet solutions, just as it is with the dollar. So, before introducing any illegitimate sanctions, illegitimate in terms of the Charter of the United Nations, one should think very carefully. For decision makers, this appears to be a problem.
So you said a moment ago that the world would be a lot better if it weren't broken into competing alliances, if there was cooperation globally. One of the reasons you don't have that is because the current American administration is dead set against you. Do you think if there were a new administration after Joe Biden that you would be able to reestablish communication with the U.S. government? Or does it not matter who the president is?
I will tell you, but let me finish the previous thought. We, together with my colleague and friend, President Xi Jinping, set a goal to reach $200 billion of mutual trade with China this year. We have exceeded this level. According to our figures, our bilateral trade with China totals already $230 billion, and the Chinese statistics says it is $240 billion. One more important thing, our trade is well balanced, mutually complementary in high-tech, energy, scientific research and development. It is very balanced. As for BRICS, where Russia took over the presidency this year, the BRICS countries are, by and large, developing very rapidly. Look, if memory serves me right, back in 1992, the share of the G7 countries in the world economy amounted to 47%, whereas in 2022 it was down to, I think, a little over 30%. The BRICS countries accounted for only 16% in 1992, but now their share is greater than that of the G7. It has nothing to do with the events in Ukraine. This is due to the trends of global development and world economy, as I mentioned just now. And this is inevitable. This will keep happening. It is like the rise of the sun. You cannot prevent the sun from rising. You have to adapt to it. How do the United States adapt? With the help of force, sanctions, pressure, bombings, and use of armed forces. This is about self-conceit. Your political establishment does not understand that the world is changing under objective circumstances. And in order to preserve your level, even if someone aspires, pardon me, to the level of dominance, you have to make the right decisions in a competent and timely manner. Such brutal actions, including with regard to Russia and, say, other countries, are counterproductive. This is an obvious fact. It has already become evident. You just asked me if another leader comes and changes something. It is not about the leader. It is not about the personality of a particular person. I had a very good relationship with, say, Bush. I know that in the United States, he was portrayed as some kind of a country boy who does not understand much. I assure you that this is not the case. I think he made a lot of mistakes with regard to Russia, too. I told you about 2008 and the decision in Bucharest to open the NATO's doors for Ukraine and so on. That happened during his presidency. He actually exercised pressure on the Europeans. But in general, on a personal human level, I had a very good relationship with him. He was no worse than any other American or Russian or European politician. I assure you, he understood what he was doing as well as others. I had such a personal relationship with Trump as well. It is not about the personality of the leader, it is about the elite's mindset. If the idea of domination at any cost, based also on forceful actions, dominates the American society, nothing will change. It will only get worse. But if, in the end, one comes to the awareness that the world has been changing due to the objective circumstances, and that one should be able to adapt to them in time, using the advantages that the US still has today, then perhaps something may change. Look, China's economy has become the first economy in the world in purchasing power parity. In terms of volume, it overtook the US a long time ago. The USA comes second, then India, 1.5 billion people, and then Japan, with Russia in the fifth place. Russia was the first economy in Europe last year, despite all the sanctions and restrictions. Is it normal from your point of view? Sanctions, restrictions, impossibility of payments in dollars, being cut off from SWIFT services, sanctions against our ships carrying oil, sanctions against airplanes, sanctions in everything, everywhere. The largest number of sanctions in the world which are applied against Russia. And we have become Europe's first economy during this time. The tools that US uses don't work. Well, one has to think about what to do. If this realization comes to the ruling elites, then yes, then the first person of the state will act in anticipation of what the voters and the people who make decisions at various levels expect from this person. Then maybe something will change.
You're describing two different systems. You say that the leader acts in the interest of the voters, but you also say these decisions are not made by the leader, they're made by the ruling classes. You've run this country for so long, you've known all these American presidents. What are those power centers in the United States, do you think? Like, who actually makes the decisions?
I don't know. America is a complex country. Conservative on one hand, rapidly changing on the other. It's not easy for us to sort it all out. Who makes decisions in the elections? Is it possible to understand this when each state has its own legislation? Each state regulates itself? Someone can be excluded from elections at the state level. It is a two-stage electoral system. It is very difficult for us to understand it. Certainly there are two parties that are dominant, the Republicans and the Democrats, and within this party system, the centers that make decisions, that prepare decisions. Then, look, why, in my opinion, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, such an erroneous, crude, completely unjustified policy of pressure was pursued against Russia? After all, this is a policy of pressure. NATO expansion, support for the separatists in Caucasus, creation of a missile defense system. These are all elements of pressure. Pressure, pressure, pressure. Then, dragging Ukraine into NATO is all about pressure, pressure, pressure. Why? I think, among other things, because excessive production capacities were created. During the confrontation with the Soviet Union, there were many centers created and specialists on the Soviet Union who could not do anything else. They convinced the political leadership that it is necessary to continue chiseling Russia, to try to break it up, to create on this territory several quasi-state entities, and to subdue them in a divided form, to use their combined potential for the future struggle with China. This is a mistake, including the excessive potential of those who worked for the confrontation with the Soviet Union. It is necessary to get rid of this. There should be new, fresh forces, people who look into the future and understand what is happening in the world. Look at how Indonesia is developing. 600 million people. Where can we get away from that? Nowhere. We just have to assume that Indonesia will enter, it is already in, the club of the world's leading economies, no matter who likes it or dislikes it. Yes, we understand and are aware that in the United States, despite all the economic problems, the situation is still normal, with the economy growing decently. The GDP is growing by 2.5%, if I'm not mistaken. But if we want to ensure the future, then we need to change our approach to what is changing. As I already said, the world would nevertheless change, regardless of how the developments in Ukraine end. The world is changing. In the United States themselves, experts are writing that the United States are nonetheless gradually changing their position in the world. It is your experts who write that. I just read them. The only question is how this would happen, painfully and quickly, or gently and gradually. And this is written by people who are not anti-American. They simply follow global development trends. That's it. And in order to assess them and change policies, we need people who think, look forward, can analyze and recommend certain decisions at the level of political leaders.
I just have to ask, you've said clearly that NATO expansion eastward is a violation of the promise you all were made in 1990. It's a threat to your country. Right before you sent troops into Ukraine, the Vice President of the United States went to the Munich Security Conference and encouraged the President of Ukraine to join NATO. Do you think that was an effort to provoke you into military action?
I repeat once again, we have repeatedly proposed to seek a solution to the problems that arose in Ukraine after 2014 coup d'etat through peaceful means. But no one listened to us. And moreover, the Ukrainian leaders who were under the complete US control suddenly declared that they would not comply with the Minsk agreements. They disliked everything there and continued military activity in that territory. And in parallel, that territory was being exploited by NATO military structures under the guise of various personnel training and retraining centers. They essentially began to create bases there, that's all. Ukraine announced that the Russians were a non-titular nationality, while passing the laws that limit the rights of non-titular nationalities in Ukraine. Ukraine, having received all these southeastern territories as a gift from the Russian people, suddenly announced that the Russians were a non-titular nationality in that territory. Is that normal? All this put together led to the decision to end the war that neo-Nazis started in Ukraine in 2014.
Do you think Zelensky has the freedom to negotiate a settlement to this conflict?
I don't know the details. Of course, it's difficult for me to judge. But I believe he has, in any case, he used to have. His father fought against the fascists, Nazis, during World War II. I once talked to him about this. I said, Volodya, what are you doing? Why are you supporting neo-Nazis in Ukraine today, while your father fought against fascism? He was a frontline soldier. I will not tell you what he answered. This is a separate topic, and I think it's incorrect for me to do so. But as to the freedom of choice, why not? He came to power on the expectations of Ukrainian people that he would lead Ukraine to peace. He talked about this. It was thanks to this that he won the elections overwhelmingly. But then, when he came to power, in my opinion, he realized two things. Firstly, it is better not to clash with neo-Nazis and nationalists because they are aggressive and very active. You can expect anything from them. And secondly, the US-led West supports them and will always support those who antagonize with Russia. It is beneficial and safe. So he took the relevant position despite promising his people to end the war in Ukraine. He deceived his voters.
But do you think at this point, as of February 2024, he has the latitude, the freedom to speak with you or your government directly about putting an end to this, which clearly isn't helping his country or the world? Can he do that, do you think?
Why not? He considers himself head of state. He won the elections. Although we believe in Russia that the coup d'etat is the primary source of power for everything that happened after 2014. And in this sense, even today, government is flawed. But he considers himself the president, and he is recognized by the United States, all of Europe, and practically the rest of the world in such a capacity. Why not? He can. We negotiated with Ukraine in Istanbul. We agreed. He was aware of this. Moreover, the negotiation group leader Mr. Arhamia is his last name, I believe still heads the faction of the ruling party, the party of the president in the Rada. He still heads the presidential faction in the Rada, the country's parliament. He still sits there. He even put his preliminary signature on the document I am telling you about. But then he publicly stated to the whole world, we were ready to sign this document, but Mr. Johnson, then the Prime Minister of Great Britain, came and dissuaded us from doing this, saying it was better to fight Russia. They would give everything needed for us to return what was lost during the clashes with Russia, and we agreed with this proposal. Look, his statement has been published. He said it publicly. Can they return to this or not? The question is, do they want it or not? Further on, President Ukraine issued a decree prohibiting negotiations with us. Let him cancel that decree, and that's it. We have never refused negotiations, indeed. We hear all the time, is Russia ready? Yes, we have not refused. It was them who publicly refused. Well, let him cancel his decree and enter into negotiations. We have never refused. And the fact that they obeyed the demand or persuasion of Mr. Johnson, the former Prime Minister of Great Britain, seems ridiculous and very sad to me, because as Mr. Arkamia put it, we could have stopped those hostilities with war a year and a half ago already. But the British persuaded us and we refused this. Where is Mr. Johnson now? And the war continues.
That's a good question. Where do you think he is, and why did he do that?
Hell knows. I don't understand it myself. There was a general starting point. For some reason, everyone had the illusion that Russia could be defeated on the battlefield. Because of arrogance, because of a pure heart, but not because of a great mind.
You've described the connection between Russia and Ukraine. You've described Russia itself a couple of times as orthodox. That's central to your understanding of Russia. You said you're orthodox. What does that mean for you? You're a Christian leader by your own description. So what effect does that have on you?
You know, as I already mentioned, in 988, Prince Vladimir himself was baptized following the example of his grandmother, Princess Olga. And then he baptized his squad. And then, gradually, over the course of several years, he baptized all the Rus. It was a lengthy process, from pagans to Christians. It took many years. But in the end, this orthodoxy, Eastern Christianity, deeply rooted itself in the consciousness of the Russian people. When Russia expanded and absorbed other nations who profess Islam, Buddhism, and Judaism, Russia has always been very loyal to those people who profess other religions. This is her strength. This is absolutely clear. And the fact is that the main postulates, main values are very similar, not to say the same, in all world religions I've just mentioned, and which are the traditional religions of the Russian Federation, Russia. By the way, Russian authorities were always very careful about the culture and religion of those people who came into the Russian Empire. This, in my opinion, forms the basis of both security and stability of the Russian statehood. All the peoples inhabiting Russia basically consider it their motherhood. They say people move over to you or to Europe from Latin America. An even clearer and more understandable example, people come, but yet they have come to you or to European countries from their historical homeland. And people who profess different religions in Russia consider Russia their motherland. They have no other motherland. We are together. This is one big family, and our traditional values are very similar. I've just mentioned one big family, but everyone has his, her own family. And this is the basis of our society. And if we say that the motherland and the family are specifically connected with each other,
Если мы говорим, что Родина и семья
it is indeed the case, since it is impossible to ensure a normal future for our children and our families unless we ensure a normal, sustainable future for the entire country, for the motherland.
устойчивое будущее для всей страны.
That is why patriotic sentiment is so strong in Russia.
But can I say that
Патриотизм.
the one way in which the religions are different is that Christianity is specifically a nonviolent religion. Jesus says, turn the other cheek, don't kill. How can a leader who has to kill, of any country, how can a leader be a Christian? How do you reconcile that to yourself?
Очень легко. Если речь идет о защите себя и своих.
It is very easy when it comes to protecting oneself and one's family, one's homeland. We won't attack anyone.
С переворота. Сначала боевые действия.
When did the developments in Ukraine start?
Вот с чего.
Since the coup d'etat and the hostilities in Donbass began, that's when they started. And we're protecting our people, ourselves, our homeland, and our future.
Она не во внешних проявлениях.
As for religion in general,
Или бить головой в пол.
you know, it's not about external manifestations. It's not about going to church every day or banging your head on the floor.
Человек ориентирован. И
It is in the heart. And our culture is so human-oriented. Dostoevsky, who was very well known in the West and the genius of Russian culture, Russian literature, spoke a lot about this, about the Russian soul.
Русский человек, российский человек, он думает больше о вечном, больше о ценности.
After all, Western society is more pragmatic. Russian people think more about the eternal, about moral values. I don't know, maybe you won't agree with me, but Western culture is more pragmatic after all.
Возможность вот сегодняшнему золотому.
I'm not saying this is bad. It makes it possible for today's golden billion to achieve good success in production, even in science and so on.
Мы вроде как выглядим одинаково,
There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying that we kind of look the same. but our
So,
minds
so
are
do you
built a
see
little
the
different.
supernatural at work as you look out across what's happening in the world now? Do you see God at work? Do you ever think to yourself, these are forces that are not human?
Да нет, я, честно говоря, так не думаю. Я думаю о том, что
No, to be honest, I don't think so.
развивается свои
My
внутренние.
opinion is that the development of the world community is in accordance with the inherent laws, and those laws are what they are.
Было всегда в истории человечества.
It's always been this way in the history of mankind. Some nations and countries rose, became stronger and more numerous, and then left the international stage, losing the status they had accustomed to.
Начиная
There's probably no need for me to give examples, but we could start with the Genghis Khan and horde conquerors, the Golden Horde, and then end with the Roman Empire.
человечество каждый
It seems that there has never been anything like the Roman Empire in the history of mankind.
стал варваров постепенно накапливалось.
Nevertheless, the potential of the barbarians gradually grew, as did their population. In general, the barbarians were getting stronger and begun to develop economically, as we would say today.
Экономически они стали укрепляться.
This eventually led to the collapse of the Roman Empire and the regime imposed by the Romans.
500 лет этот процесс.
However, it took 5 centuries for the Roman Empire to fall apart.
В сегодняшней ситуации
The
разница.
difference with what is happening now
Процессы изменений.
is that all the processes of change are happening at a much faster pace than in Roman times.
So when does the AI empire start, do you think?
Да. Всё более
You're
сложно.
asking increasingly more complicated questions. To answer them, you need to be an expert in big numbers, big data, and AI. Mankind is currently facing many threats due to the genetic researches It is now possible to create a superhuman, a specialized human being, a genetically engineered athlete, scientist, military man. There are reports that Elon Musk had already had a chip implanted in the human brain in the USA.
What do you think of that?
Ну, Маска, я думаю, что Маска
Well, I think there's no stopping Elon Musk. He will do as he sees fit. Nevertheless, you need to find some common ground with him, search for ways to persuade him. I think he's a smart person, I truly believe he is. So you need to reach an agreement with him because this process needs to be formalized and subjected to certain rules.
того, что будет происходить с ним в связи с развитием вот этих новейших исследований технологий.
Humanity has to consider what is going to happen due to the newest development in genetics or in AI. One can make an approximate prediction of what will happen.
Угрозу к своему существованию от ядерного оружия все начали обладать
Once mankind felt an existential threat coming from nuclear weapons, all nuclear nations began to come to terms with one another since they realized the negligent use of nuclear weaponry could drive humanity to extinction.
искусственного интеллекта, либо генетики, либо еще каких-то современных направлений, остановить которые
It
невозможно.
is impossible to stop research in genetics or AI today, just as it was impossible to stop the use of gunpowder back in the day.
Их исследование все равно будет. Но когда человечество почувствует угрозу для себя,
But as soon as we realize that the threat comes from unbridled and uncontrolled development of AI, or genetics, or any other field, the time will come to reach an international agreement on how to regulate these things.
I appreciate all the time you've given us. I just got to ask you one last question, and that's about someone who's very famous in the United States, probably not here, Evan Gershkovich, who's the Wall Street Journal reporter. He's 32, and he's been in prison for almost a year. This is a huge story in the United States, and I just want to ask you directly, without getting into the details of it or your version of what happened, if as a sign of your decency, you would be willing to release him to us and we'll bring him back to the United States.
мы столько сделали жестов доброй воли, что, мне кажется, мы исчерпали все.
We have done so many gestures of goodwill out of decency that I think we have run out of them.
Ни разу не ответил. Но
We have never seen anyone reciprocate to us in a similar manner.
что мы
However, in theory, we can say that we do not rule out that we can do that
исключаем того, что мы можем
if our partners take reciprocal steps.
встречных движений со стороны наших
When I talk about the partners, I first of all refer to special services.
представителей специальных служб.
Special services are in contact with one another. They are talking about the matter in question.
То, чтобы не решить это.
There is no taboo to settle this issue. We are willing to solve it.
Есть определенные условия, которые
But there are certain terms being discussed via special services channels.
узким каналом между спецслужбами.
I believe an agreement can be reached.
So typically, I mean, this stuff has happened for obviously centuries. One country catches another spy within its borders, it trades it for one of its own intel guys in another country. I think what makes it, and it's not my business, but what makes this different is the guy's obviously not a spy, he's a kid. And maybe he was breaking your law in some way, but he's not a super spy, and everybody knows that, and he's being held hostage in exchange, which is true. With respect, it's true, everyone knows it's true. So maybe he's in a different category. Maybe it's not fair to ask for, you know, somebody else in exchange for letting him out. Maybe it degrades Russia to do that.
Вы знаете, можно как угодно говорить, что такое шпион, что не
You know, you can give different interpretations to what constitutes a spy, but there are certain things provided by law. If a person gets secret information and does that in a conspiratorial manner, then this is qualified as espionage. And that is exactly what he was doing. He was receiving classified, confidential information, and he did it covertly. Maybe he did that out of carelessness or his own initiative.
Поэтому
Considering the sheer fact that this is qualified as espionage, the fact has been proven as he was caught red-handed when he was receiving this information. If it had been some far-fetched excuse, some fabrication, something not proven, it would have been a different story then. But he was caught red-handed when he was secretly getting confidential information. What is it then?
But are you suggesting he was working for the US government or NATO, or he was just a reporter who was given material he wasn't supposed to have? Those seem like very different things.
Я не знаю, на кого он работал. Но повторю еще.
I don't know who he was working for. But I would like to reiterate that getting classified information in secret is called espionage, and he was working for the US Special Services, some other agencies. I don't think he was working for Monaco, as Monaco is hardly interested in getting that information. It is up to Special Services to come to an agreement.
Нашему мнению,
Some groundwork has been laid. There are people who, in our view, are not connected with Special Services. Let me tell you a story about a person serving a sentence in an allied country of the US. That person, due to patriotic sentiments, eliminated a bandit in one of the European capitals.
во время событий на Кавказе.
During the events in the Caucasus, do you know what he was doing?
Хочется говорить, но я не знаю.
I don't want to say that, but I will do it anyway. He was laying our soldiers, taken prisoner, on the road and then drove his car over their heads. What kind of person is that? Can he even be called human?
Нашелся патриот, который ликвидировал многие вопросы.
But there was a patriot who eliminated him in one of the European capitals.
Кстати, именно.
Whether he did it of his own volition or not, that is a different question.
Evan
Well,
Gershkovich
what- what
did
I'm
that. I mean, that's a completely different. I mean, this is a
No,
32-year-old. Like most
Он
people.
делал, да, он-
He committed something different.
Да, не просто журналист. Я повторю еще раз. это-
He's not just a journalist. I reiterate, he's a journalist who was secretly getting confidential information.
который-
Yes, it is different, but still, I'm talking about other people who are essentially controlled by the US authorities, wherever they are serving a sentence. There is an ongoing dialogue between the special services. This has to be resolved in a calm, responsible, and professional manner. They are keeping in touch, so let them do their work. I do not rule out that the person you refer to, Mr. Gershkovich, may return to his motherland. By the end of the day, it does not make any sense to keep him in prison in Russia. We want the US Special Services to think about how they can contribute to achieving the goals our special services are pursuing.
те проблемы,
We are ready to talk. Moreover, the talks are underway. And there have been many successful examples of these talks crowned with success. Probably this is going to be crowned with success as well.
мы тут не догадаемся.
But we have to come to an agreement.
I hope you are now.
Mr. President, thank you.
Мне тоже.
I also want him to return to his homeland at last. I'm absolutely sincere. But let me say once again, the dialogue continues. The more public we render things of this nature, the more difficult it becomes to resolve them. Everything has to be done in calm manner.
I wonder if that's
That's
true
regulation.
with the war, though. Also, I mean, I guess I want to ask one more question, which is, and maybe you don't want to say so for strategic reasons, but are you worried that what's happening in Ukraine could lead to something much larger and much more horrible? And how motivated are you just to call the U.S. government and say, let's come to terms?
Послушайте, я же сказал.
I already said that we did not refuse to talk. We are willing to negotiate. It is the Western side, and Ukraine is obviously a satellite state of the US. It is evident. I do not want you to take it as if I'm looking for a strong word or an insult, but we both understand what is happening. The financial support, 72 billion US dollars, was provided. Germany ranks second, then other European countries come.
Огромный поток.
Dozens of billions of US dollars are going to Ukraine.
Поэтому-
There's a huge
поэтому,
influx of
ну,
weapons.
скажите,
In this case, you should tell the current Ukrainian leadership to stop and come to negotiating table, rescind this absurd decree. We did not refuse.
Sure, but you already said it. I didn't think you meant it as an insult because you already said correctly. It's been reported that Ukraine was prevented from negotiating a peace settlement by the former British Prime Minister acting on behalf of the Biden administration. So of course they're a satellite. Big countries control small countries. That's not new. And that's why I asked about dealing directly with the Biden administration, which is making these decisions, not President Zelensky of Ukraine.
если администрация Зеленского на Украине отказалась от переговоров, я
Well, if the Zelensky administration in Ukraine refused to negotiate, I assume they did it under the instruction from Washington. If Washington believes it to be the wrong decision, let it abandon it. Let it find a delicate excuse so that no one is insulted. Let it come up with a way out.
Пусть они это делают.
It was not us who made this decision, it was them. So let them go back on it. That is
Теперь
it.
мы должны искать выход из этого неправильного решения.
However, they made the wrong decision, and now we have to look for a way out of the situation to correct their mistakes. They did it, so let them correct it themselves. We support this.
So I just want to make sure I'm not misunderstanding what you're saying. I don't think that I am. I think you're saying you want a negotiated settlement to what's happening in Ukraine.
Правильно.
Right. And we made it. We prepared a huge document in Istanbul that was initialed by the head of the Ukrainian delegation. He affixed his signature to some of the provisions, not to all of it. He put his signature and then he himself said, "We were ready to sign it and the war would have been over long ago, 18 months ago." However, Prime Minister Johnson came, talked us out of it, and we missed that chance. Well, you missed it, you made a mistake, let them get back to that, that is all. Why do we have to bother ourselves and correct somebody else's mistakes? I know one can say it is our mistake. It was us who intensified the situation and decided to put an end to the war that started in 2014 in Donbass, as I have already said, by means of weapons. Let me get back to furthering history. I already told you this. We were just discussing it. Let us go back to 1991, when we were promised that NATO would not expand, to 2008, when the doors to NATO opened to the declaration of state sovereignty of Ukraine, declaring Ukraine a neutral state. Let us go back to the fact that NATO and US military bases started to appear on the territory of Ukraine, creating threats to us. Let us go back to coup d'etat in Ukraine in 2014. It is pointless though, isn't it? We may go back and forth endlessly, but they stop negotiations. Is it a mistake? Yes. Correct it. We are ready. What else is needed?
Do you think it's too humiliating at this point for NATO to accept Russian control of what was 2 years ago Ukrainian territory?
Я же сказал.
I said let them think how to do it with dignity. There are options if there is a will. Up until now, there has been the uproar and screaming about inflicting a strategic defeat on Russia on the battlefield.
Стратегического поражения России, поражения.
Now they are apparently coming to realize that it is difficult to achieve, if possible at all. In my opinion, it is impossible by definition. It is never going to happen. It seems to me that now, those who are in power in the West have come to realize this as well. If so, if the realization has set in, they have to think what to do next. We are ready for this dialogue.
Would you be willing to say, congratulations, NATO, you won, and just keep the situation where it is now.
Ну, знаете, это предмет переговоров.
You know, it is a subject matter for the negotiations. No one is willing to conduct, or to put it more accurately,
Точнее сказать, хотят.
they're willing but do not know how to do it.
Это не только я.
I know they want it. It is not just I see it, but I know they do want it. But they're struggling to understand how to do it. They have driven the situation to the point where we are at. It is not us who have done that. It is our partners, opponents who have done that. Well, now let them think how to reverse the situation. We're not against it. It would be funny if it were not so sad.
Да? Было бы смешно, если бы не было так грустно.
This endless mobilization in Ukraine, the hysteria, the domestic problems, sooner or later it will result in agreement.
Истерика там, внутренние проблемы.
You know, this probably sounds strange given the current situation,
Всё равно. И
but the relations between the two peoples will be rebuilt anyway.
ситуация прозвучит.
It will take a lot of time, but they will heal.
Между народом и страной. Потребуется времени.
I'll give you very unusual examples.
Совсем приведу необычный.
There's a combat encounter on the battlefield. Here's a specific example. Ukrainian soldiers got encircled. This is an example from real life. Our soldiers were shouting to them, "There is no chance, surrender yourselves, come out and you will be alive."
Наши солдаты им кричат.
Suddenly, the Ukrainian soldiers were screaming from there in Russian, perfect Russian, saying, "Russians, do not surrender." And all of them perished.
Не сдаются.
They still identify themselves as Russian.
Они все по-русски настоящие. В этом смысле это что-то.
What is happening is, to a certain extent, an element of a civil war.
Если
Everyone in the West thinks that the Russian people have been split by hostilities forever.
растащили.
No, they will be reunited. The unity is still there.
Воссоединение произойдет.
Why are the Ukrainian authorities dismantling the Ukrainian Orthodox Church?
Русскую православную церковь.
Because it brings together not only the territory, it brings together our souls. No one will be able to separate the soul. Shall we end here, or is there anything else?
No, I think that's great.
Спасибо.
Thank you, Mr. President. Free speech is bigger than any one person or any one organization. Societies are defined by what they will not permit. Watching is the total inversion of virtue.
Okay. Interesting, huh? Pretty long-winded. I mean, if you watch the whole thing from the start, he went into some major historical background, which, if you don't understand Vladimir Putin, you have to understand he's a staunch Russian nationalist, so he knows the history of the country going back a long, long time. And so he sees it from a much different vantage point, a much longer-term perspective. But if you haven't figured out from what he said, he's gone out of his way to try to reach an olive branch out to the West. And all the West has done is smack him across the face and tell him to go F himself. And I think he feels a little bit silly because he's a little naive that, he kind of thought they would work with him. And he kind of realized after a while, like, there's no way these people, kind of like what Israel does with regard to the settlements and the territory. People think they can negotiate in good faith, and there's just no talking to these people. So, he's not the kind of guy that's Mr. Evil. He wants to see Russia prosper. He wants to have mutually beneficial trade like he's doing with China. And he wanted to be a part of NATO. He wanted to be a part of, the club. He didn't want to cause any conflict after the fall of the Soviet Union, when he came into office. And how the hell has Russia saved Syria? Well, Russia is there at the invitation of the Syrian government. They've kept the... you got to remember, Syria's got a lot going on. So I don't know if you heard Putin say, but in the Caucasus, he said that the United States CIA was funding terror groups. And most Americans don't know this, but the United States is not against terrorism at all. The United States funds terror groups everywhere. It's all about what they're trying to accomplish. So, for example, in Syria, they want to overthrow the Assad regime, and there's like 12 different terror groups in Syria that the United States backs and funds and trains and arms. You know, it's like even though these people aren't great people, the United States doesn't care as long as they reach their political objectives, and they want to take out, Iran, Syria, Libya, any country where the leaders are strong. They want in. They want to get rid of Putin because he's a strong leader, and he's not going to let the West come in and push them around like Germany is right now. He mentioned that the Western leaders are so compliant with America, and he said the fact that Germany's economy is being destroyed because of natural gas supplies being cut off from Russia. The U.S. doesn't care. They want Germany to be sort of neutered so that we can be in charge of Europe. It's just, it kind of makes you sick to your stomach the more you learn about how America operates. It's not good. Like, we're by far not the good guys. And I would say the same thing as far as a realization about Israel. Once you really know, you figured, you thought Israel was the good guy before you learned more about this. And the more you learn, you're like, nope, they're the bad guys. And it kind of makes you sad that, you want to think growing up, you've been conditioned to believe your country's, great. It's an example of democracy, and it does good around the world. And then you realize that it's one big racket, and these three-letter agencies do all this crazy shit, both domestically and foreign, to mess with people. And it's just very discouraging. And it's what we've morphed into. I don't know if it was always, I'm sure to some extent it was somewhat like this, but since World War II, it's gotten really bad. And between money and politics and the permanent, this is what I talk about as far as the permanent security state. Three-letter agencies, the media apparatus, surveillance. It's not great. And, I think the only place it can go is to devolve into authoritarianism. And I think that's right where it's headed. And I think Russia and the leaders of Russia and China kind of see what America's doing. And while they're very cautious about the leadership, they kind of see the place crumbling from within. Somebody says, what happened? I don't know how to answer that, Johnny. That's a pretty broad question. What happened? But if you clarify, I'll try to answer you. Anyway, not that I haven't known this for quite a long time. It's just that it's good for people to see a foreign leader talk about the history of trying to negotiate with the United States and the Europeans, trying to reach out and saying, hey, can we work together? Can we figure something out? And, even they tried to have peace in Ukraine. And, of course, they sent Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister of Great Britain, to come out and, scuttle the negotiations. And then you heard about Zelensky passed a law that no one's allowed to negotiate for a ceasefire. So, what happened to the state of America or to the state of the United States? It's been taken over by a bunch of neocons, a bunch of internal actors that are sort of the permanent, some people call it the deep state. It's got tons and tons of impact by rich people and wealthy oligarchs and industry special interest groups by industry, big pharma, big energy, big ag. It doesn't have anything to do with the people anymore. The government doesn't serve the people. It's not by the people or for the people. It's to help oligarchs and the national security state do their bidding. That's it. That's what the government's become. And it's got, like he said, almost $34 trillion of debt. Why are we messing in Ukraine? Don't we have bigger problems to fix? That's the point. Yeah, we have problems, but who caused the problems? The reason there's $34 trillion of debt is not because Americans are irresponsible. It's because the wealthy class uses the Treasury as a slush fund to make money for itself through foreign war, through what we saw in 2019 with the Pfizer Moderna stuff, all the money that got put out of the government for the carry us through that period of time. Again, I made videos about this. It's not just the United States. There's a whole sort of transnational class of people that have a common mindset, and what they want is they want more, and they want the opportunity to get more for themselves. And a lot of times that requires access to different countries around the world, whether it be economic entanglement, whether it's military or subversion of their leadership or whatever it may be, just to get in. and be able to exploit the country, the workforce, the natural resources. Put military bases in certain places so you can do more of the same. So, somebody says, breaking news, Seisel is the president of Mexico. I'm not sure what that means. Right now I know it's Antonio Manuel Lopez Obrador. Did something happen? There was a coup d'etat because they don't have elections. I'm not sure what you mean, Delaham 14. Are you laughing? I can't see what that says. I got to put my glasses on. Anyway, Sisi is the president of Egypt. Al-Sisi. I'm not sure what you're talking about. Yeah, that's what I just said. Yeah, I don't know what that person was talking about as far as Mexico goes. Yeah, AMLO, Antonio Manuel Lopez Obrador, is the president of Mexico. Oh, it's a joke. Okay, well, I'm not sure how that's funny, but okay. I'll take your word for it. Biden said that Sisi was the president of Mexico? Okay, now I understand. Anyway, Biden is completely out to lunch. I mean, I don't know what they're giving him when he looks sharper, but he's got to be on some kind of a drug because half the time he looks like he's comatose. It's really sad, It's really bad. Anyway, I'm curious to hear what people think about the speech. I mean, obviously, he's not the most, entertaining guy in terms of he's very serious, he's very regimented, he's very by the book. But here's the good thing for Russia. He's calm, he's centered, he doesn't take things too seriously. He just kind of says, okay, we want to do this. Okay, you want to do that? Okay. But then he goes about preparing his country for the alternative, which, if you heard him say during the speech, the U.S. backed out of the intermediate ballistic missile agreement. And so Russia said, okay, no problem. And now they've developed hypersonic intercontinental missiles, which the United States cannot fire down. And so if there is an exchange, we're cooked. Like, we are absolutely cooked. And they do have weapons that can shoot ours down, by the way. So they may not be cooked. Depends on where they come from, submarines or whatever. Some may hit, but I think more will hit in the United States than would hit in Russia. So, I think we've overplayed our hand, just as Israel's doing right now in Gaza. Same kind of thing. And we have a bunch of rank amateurs representing the country, guys like Blinken, who's a joke. And he's risen past his ability to do his job. He's not meant to be a Secretary of State. He's a rank amateur, and quite frankly, he gets laughed at by the international community. He's a joke. So it's embarrassing because we should conduct ourselves better. We should have representatives that are more serious in terms of wanting to work with people. And there's an overconfident, arrogant group of immature children in charge right now that take it very cavalierly that we're dealing with nation states that are nuclear armed, and we're just kind of doing our thing as if it's 1965. And we're not in that same world right now. It's a different situation, and they just haven't been able, for whatever reason, to accept the fact that this is a whole new paradigm, and the U.S. isn't it. We're not the only country that can throw its weight around anymore. Other people just don't do it as overtly. They don't talk about it. They're not arrogant in public. They don't wave it around and put it in your face. But, if you take a shot at them, they're going to knock you out. Right? They're sort of that quiet person when the bully bullies them, they knock the bully out, right? And I don't even know what our readiness is right now in terms of troops. So I know we have good air power and we have a good Navy, but I think a lot of our naval equipment is outdated. And if there was a global conflict, I think the U.S. is not as ready as people might think it would be. And that's not great. So, I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, we all think in America that nothing's ever going to come to our shores. Nothing has, right? Other than the attacks of 9/11. But no military force has invaded or occupied us, since 1770. So the question is, what if that happens, right? What if the arrogance and egotism of our leadership causes a conflict and now we're under the military occupation of another power? I hate to say it. It's almost like what I said about Israel. I didn't mean this the way I said. I should have been careful to say it differently. The citizens don't deserve it, but the country as a whole does. Because we have a bunch of Americans, too, unfortunately, that believe the story. They're not very well informed, unfortunately. They're overconfident. They think we're great because we were born here. We're not great. We're just another group of people like anybody else. That's like how the Israeli leadership thinks. I think they're the shit because they're from Israel. They're the chosen people. Well, Americans think we're great because we're riding on the legacy of World War II and our greatness we're not great. We're just people, right? And a lot of situations in the United States has gotten way worse. And even though people want to maintain pride in their nation, they want to, they think that Donald Trump will restore greatness. It's not happening. Not happening. So, and there may be people in here right now that think, well, Trump's obviously a better choice than Biden. He may be on some things. Other things, I definitely think he isn't. But I don't know. I think we're in big, big, big trouble. And I mean big trouble. So I hope I'm wrong. But I think in 10 to 15 years, you're not going to recognize this place. It's going to be a totally different country, a different place to live. I think it's smart to consider your options, because I don't think the things that I talk about as far as overcoming the power stuff is going to happen. Even though I kind of think how the playbook would have to work out, I don't think it's going to happen. And that's because Americans are just too subdued with NFL football and Netflix, and you got to vote for somebody, right? And that's what they think is going to solve the problem eventually, hopefully. But you have bad and worse as far as two choices, and they're all controlled by the moneyed interest. What's the point of doing that? If you've done it 5 or 6 times in a row, is the 7th time going to be different? I don't think so. Right? I will upload video. Just give me a minute. Yeah, for those of you who didn't see the whole thing, my live was broken into 2. I think if you go more than an hour without touching the screen, they end your live. They give you a little puzzle piece, and by the time I saw it, it was too late to do it, and it ended the live. Also, I think for the first 10 minutes, I had my earpiece in, and I forgot to switch off the Bluetooth, so I think people couldn't hear it that well, which is why so many people left. But then when I reloaded the second live, a lot of people came in, which is where I think most of you came in from. So, yeah, listen, I wish I had better things to say. I mean, don't get me wrong. We still have a pretty good life here, right? Most people can, have the basics of advanced living. But in terms of being able to make ends meet, it's very expensive to live here. Most places you go to, if you were to travel to, let's say, Honduras or another country that's not too developed or less developed, you're going to see a totally different cost structure. Go live in most all countries. It's going to cost you probably 50 to 60% of what it costs here to live. How was Putin interviewed? Oh, how was the interview? It was a little bit dry, to be fair. I think most people, if you're not a political person, it would have been hard to watch because, he tends to talk about some pretty dry subjects. He's not a really flashy guy. So, I think it's important to hear how he thinks, though. He's a very influential leader. And I think the thing he seems to be most is just kind of disappointed, but okay, you do you, I'll do me, and we'll see what happens. That's kind of the sense I get from a guy like him. And it's unfortunate that our leaders can't see past their arrogance and egotism to just work with somebody and just accept the fact that they're another powerful entity. We're not going to get in there and take their stuff. So just let them be them. But they just can't do it. They just can't bring themselves to leave anybody alone, for that matter. And it looks like we're going to get to loggerheads with China vis-a-vis Taiwan. That looks like that's going to come to a head at some point. And that's over semiconductors, right, which affect everything. And then it looks like Russia, too. So I don't know what the hell. Between Iran, Russia, and China, I think the U.S. policy is insane. And I don't know to what degree there are other people influencing it. We talked about Zionism. We talked about people in government. I don't know for sure. A lot of people allege that there's influence. It wouldn't surprise me. It seems like it does go in a direction that's more in line with that argument than others. So I don't know. Here on this Thursday night in early February of 2024, who knows? Who knows what time we have left? We're at 247 years of this experiment called the United States of America. And it's just gotten to a point now where, the people are unhappy, a lot of crime, a lot of violence, a lot of people locked up, a lot of drug addiction, all sorts of problems everywhere you look, lots of student debt, lots of private debt, lots of public debt, just all sorts of things that are in the wrong place. Like the check marks are all in the wrong places. No universal health care, people being extorted for health care payments every month, all that money going to corporations, everything's a chain store. I just think everything serves the almighty dollar for the oligarchy. And we're all taught to go for that. Like your happiness path in life is to be a part of that. Like you should aspire to get like them. And if you do that long enough, which I've done in my life, you realize that's bullshit. You don't get happiness from chasing money. You get happiness from doing something fulfilling. Now, you may find a work that's fulfilling that happens to end up you making a lot of money. If you do, good for you. If you provide value to others, good for you. But money in and of itself seems to be the aim, like just getting more of it. And I talk about that group of people. They're not happy. They're called the sociopathic serial accumulators. That's what I call them. And they just never get enough. It's like chasing your shadow. You jump towards your shadow, and what happens? Your shadow just moves 3 feet to your left, right? You can never land on it, and that's the point. Somebody says, what about Russia's debt? Their economic system is much more sound than ours. They don't have nearly the debt to GDP ratio that we have. And remember, they're extremely resource rich. I mean, they'll never run out of money, ever. They'll just keep developing and developing and developing. So, they have tons of oil and natural gas that has a lot of value on the international markets. And as long as they can ship it or pipe it somewhere, they're going to be making money. Of course, the U.S. has put a huge limit on what they can send to Europe, which was a big market for them. And during the interview, he alluded to that. He wants to send gas through Poland and through Ukraine. And those avenues aren't available to him right now, which he'd like to have, because when you have excess supply, you want to sell it. Meanwhile, you have the United States that purportedly destroyed the Keystone 2 pipeline. Am I saying it right? Not Keystone 2. You know what I'm talking about. They destroyed that pipeline that goes under the Baltic. And so because of that, the United States is now shipping liquefied natural gas to Europe, which costs like 4 or 5 times more, which is hurting the Germans, right? Why the U.S. doesn't care, and the leadership of Germany seems to be going along with it. It's Nord Stream. Sorry, I said Keystone. Thank you. Yeah, once in a while your brain goes in the wrong direction, and especially the older you get. So thank you for clarifying. Yeah, I mean, he didn't say the Americans did it. He said you have to look at who has the means and who has the motive. He's a very smart guy in the way he communicates. He doesn't inflame stuff. He doesn't point fingers. He calls people our partners. He uses language in a very conciliatory, non-accusatory way, which I like about the guy. I think that's good about him. He did not say the Americans did it directly. Of course, I'm sure everybody knows that's what he meant. But that's what he said. So, and I think everybody else agrees. Like, why would Russia destroy their own pipeline, right? They spent like $5 billion building it. You don't destroy your own $5 billion pipeline. I can't believe the U.S. even said that. They did it to themselves. That's almost as good as the human shields argument that H group hates life. They don't care about life, and they want to martyr everybody. So therefore, they make people unalive and build it. Come on, it's absurd. Yeah. So, listen, the United States, I'm telling you, I live here. I was born here. I didn't choose it. It just happened. And the older I've gotten, the more I've realized that, it's a rotten government. It's a rotten, awful, despicable, duplicitous, low-down, dirty, bad faith government and military. It's not good. And it's what pushes all that is just a disgusting bunch of neoconservatives and oligarchs who help fund the political process that maintains the status quo, which is just more of this bullshit. And listen, I could probably make a shitload of money if I went along with the path, right? I know how to run a business. I just don't want to anymore. It doesn't, F that. I don't want to be a part of that flow of just disgusting inertia of money. Yeah, someone says you should see what the U.S. government did to the native population. Listen, I don't think we were ever the good guys, quite frankly, looking back in history. I mean, we unalived 10 or 12 million people on the North American continent. We stole land from Mexico. We basically had slavery for 210 years or whatever it was. And then we try to go through Jim Crow, and then we try to go through the economic changes that are going on now. We have nothing but this corporatocracy that's come out of all this. That's just the worst of the worst. It's the worst possible situation to be in. I don't think it can be fixed, which I know is hard to hear. I think it's going to have to take its course, and we probably have to get smacked in the face, unfortunately, for us to change. I don't know exactly what that means or what form it's going to take, but I think that the United States has a level of arrogance and short-sightedness that it just needs to be corrected somehow. And that's probably going to cause a lot of, problems for the people, whether it be something that flies intercontinentally, I hope it isn't that, or whether it's some sort of military strike with conventional weapons, or whether it's some sort of invasion or some combination of the bunch, or some kind of EMP weapon that knocks out our electricity and causes us to basically crumble from within. That's what I would do if I was China or Russia. If and when push comes to shove, I would just destroy our infrastructure. You have a football World Cup in 2026. You're talking about the United States is hosting the World Cup in 2026? We'll see. We'll see. But yeah, I think a lot of things are coming. I think there's going to be an economic reset. There has to be. You know, there's something like $160 trillion of derivatives, which are just insanely unregulated, counterparty risk trades that are in place that tend to bring down institutions when they start to unwind. So right now the stock market's near all-time highs or at all-time highs right now. It's going to run up, I think, more. It's because markets have usually this last like runaway phase where they just go up, 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 and then they go boom. And I think we're in that last little phase right now. I don't know how long it's going to last. A lot of people are saying the summer of this year it's going to be a big adjustment, and then maybe it'll go up more, and then another crash in 2025, 2026 where it's going to really be bad. I don't know. If there's a whole-scale war, it's going to be destroyed, right? The stock market goes terrible in a war. That's why I'm land back to they actually have rights to the land. Yeah, listen, I'm all for whatever reparations should be done to both people who had their land stolen or their grandparents unalive. That's only fair, right? It's the same thing we're asking for in Israel. In Palestine, I should say. Somebody says learn Mandarin. Probably not a bad idea. Even so, even if you just use it for business or for your future, it's probably a good thing to know how to do. Somebody says, I suspect U.S. will have hyperinflation with or without war. Yeah, I mean, we're already starting that, right? It's not terribly out of control right now. It's slowed down a little bit, but I mean, go to the store. I mean, I was spending about $50 or $60 to get my normal groceries. Now it's like $110 That's pretty big inflation, right? That's almost 100%. I don't know exactly how they get 6 or 7% out of that because I'm not paying 6 or 7% extra. So, yeah, prices are insane. Anyway, that was my take. I don't know what else anybody else thought. If you heard the history of Ukraine he was talking about, talked about the older history of the history from Russia, from the long-term Russia, going back to 900 years ago, which I thought was interesting. But then he talked about the more recent history. Poland obviously has a very tense relationship with Russia, if you couldn't tell that from that. And it used to be part of the Warsaw Pact, which was this little intermediate buffer. But he talked about NATO. He talked about NATO's expansion, and they said that they wouldn't expand 1 inch to the east. And then, of course, there's been 5 pushes, but 15 former Soviet states that have been incorporated into NATO. And more recently, Finland, which does border Russia to the north. So, I think they have reasons to want to protect themselves. And I think that it's fair for them to want to. And they pretty much said, hey, Ukraine has to stay neutral. That's it. Just no neo-Yazis pushing this and no NATO-trained forces, no missiles. Just, hey, lay off. And, of course, the U.S. didn't. Told them to basically go pound sand. The guy's got no respect from the West. None. And he's a quiet guy. I think he's patient. I think he's decent. But I also think he's got this underlying, these mother, whatters, they're gonna get their due if they keep pushing their luck. That's kind of the sense I get about him. But he's not crazy. He's not going to do anything proactive just to kind of, be spiteful. And I'm sure if somebody came to him with a more decent approach, he would probably work with them. But he's probably going to lay down the law as far as what things have to be after all the bullshit that's been done. He's like, listen, I'm happy to deal with you, but no more bullshit. Stop with the crazy stuff. So we'll see. I think we would be very lucky. Any country would be lucky to have a leader like him. How his demeanor is, how he thinks things through, how he's deliberate, how he's patient. But he's firm, and he doesn't bluff. So if he says he's going to do something, he does it. And I think he told the United States pretty much, if you keep doing this shit, and the Ukrainian government, I'm going to have to do something. And they did, and so he did something. And there you go. That's where we are. And unfortunately, if he said, he's still open to peace right now. He still is. If they came over with a delegation right now and worked something out to stop arming the Ukrainians, he's willing to work out a deal. Just stop what we're doing, and we'll maintain our defensive position with regard to the territories in the east that we've annexed. Rightly so, I believe, because of what the Ukrainian government, I know if you're Ukrainian, you don't want to hear this, but the Ukrainian government, in its collusion with the West, forfeited its right to the territory it was trying to destroy and forcibly make the people in the East comply with the central government. They deserve to lose it. Just like if we were sending missiles and artillery into Texas, trying to get Mexican Americans to somehow speak English only for a period of 8 years, and we unalived 15 or 20,000 people. Yeah, I can understand the Mexican government coming and be like, dude, what the fuck? Why are you harming our people? These are our people culturally, right? So, again, it's always about unfair versus fair, right? People who try to behave in a fair way, the U.S. wants to take advantage of it. So yeah, it's discouraging. I wish we were better. I really do. But I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen. So I don't know what we can do, folks. If you're in the United States and you're trying to think of a way to overcome this, I've given the blueprint what I think it would take, but I just don't know how we get people to. First of all, people have to get in that mindset, right? They have to understand what the hell's going on, which most people don't. I've talked about this on people's lives. Somebody, he says, you're in outer space. What are you even thinking? Come back to Earth, is what I was told. Okay, I'm in outer space. Meanwhile, everybody here is completely clueless that the rug's being pulled out from under them. At least they feel it, but they're not really sure who's responsible or how it's really happening. They're just angry, and they don't know who to go after. Okay, I'm not going to vote for Biden. Well, you're going to vote for Trump? What's that going to do? He's just as in favor of Israel as anybody, right? So I don't know what to say, except for, it's discouraging. I'd like to be able to say positive things about my country. I really would. But they got to do something to merit that, right? And I don't know if you saw the interview, but Tucker was talking about someone who's in prison there. And Tucker said, well, he's not a spy, obviously. And of course, Putin said, yes, he is. He was working with one of our 3-letter agencies. He was trying to get documents, and he was caught red-handed. So he's in jail. And they said, well, Tucker said, well, aren't you willing to show goodwill by releasing him? He's like, listen, I'm out of goodwill. I've tried to show goodwill. These people have done nothing but spit in my face. I'm kind of out of goodwill, is what he basically said. Now, C-Tang said something when the interview first started. I was watching the comments before I had to, put the sound back on. I think she may have left or whomever. But C-Tang said Putin still shouldn't have invaded Ukraine. So let me tell you why I disagree with that assessment. Just like we've talked about the H group in Gaza. In my mind, that's the equivalent of saying they should never do anything, just sit back and just take it. Just allow the Israelis to run roughshod over them. We don't believe that, right? Well, if you look at the interest from Russian standpoint, and even more so because they're a powerful country, what the U.S. was doing in Ukraine to kind of stir things up was untenable for Putin over time. Between NATO expansion and arming the people and doing an overthrow of the government in 2014 and further moving towards the border and further subjecting these poor Russian-speaking people in the east to artillery and bombing of civilian areas and all this other stuff. And they were begging him to come in for like 6 or 7 years. He said, no, I don't want the problems. You got to figure it out. And then finally he realized their military was going to go in and literally crush these people. And he decided, okay, I got to deal with this shit finally. So that's why he did it. And I don't blame him. I don't like war. And it's disgusting that the U.S. has used Ukraine and their soldiers as a way to try to do its bidding, to try to somehow disrupt Russia and be able to degrade their military and bring down Putin somehow, which hasn't worked. And they've sanctioned him out the ass, and that hasn't worked. Their economy is doing just fine. So the U.S. miscalculated, right? They thought they'd be able to easily do this. Like, we just have to throw a bunch of money at it. It'll work out. Nope, hasn't worked. So, when somebody asked if they talk about the BRICS countries, they talked about multipolar world briefly, and the fact that, everyone's going to have to find a way to get along. Like the Russians and the Chinese have a goal of X amount of trade between them. And, the U.S., by doing all this stuff, is basically cutting itself off. We have a weird marriage because our corporations outsourced all their labor and production to China over the last 30 years to make more money. So we depend on China to make shit for us to buy. But at some point, that's gonna go away, in case you don't know. And most of the stuff we get for cheap is not going to get here anymore from China. When we finally have a conflict, they're not going to supply us with anything. That's going to be over with. So, I'm saying that Putin is in a position. Somebody says, are you saying that Putin is the good guy? I'm saying that vis-a-vis the negotiations and the processes that have unfolded, he's by far the more amicable party who's worked really hard to try to make this work peacefully, and the U.S. has spit in his face. That's what I'm saying. I don't want to make value judgments about good or bad, because I don't know what he's done to stay in power exactly. I'm sure he's done some things that were rather unpleasant, but the way he's categorized in the West is completely silly. It's absurd. And, again, look what he's done in terms of his behavior. There's so much behind the scenes that we don't get told. And it looks like he just one day willy-nilly got up and decided, I'm going to take territory, right? That's what we're told. He's some madman. No, he was even asked during the interview, people are saying you have territorial ambitions outside of Ukraine. He started laughing. It's like, why would I want to start a global war? That doesn't serve my country's interests. If you notice where they've stopped, if you look at the terrain, I can put it up on the computer here. They've stopped in the east. They've created like a banana-shaped buffer that goes from the north down through the south of Mariupol and over towards Crimea. And they've created like a contiguous land bridge as a buffer to protect their interest against what the U.S. is trying to do. So I would say in this case, yeah, Russia is most definitely the good guy in terms of the way this is played out. They're not the aggressors. They're responding to things that are untenable not to respond to. That's what I'm saying. And if you spend a lot of time researching this, I hope you'll come to the same conclusion, because it's impossible not to, I believe. And listen, I'm not for Russia or for China. I'm just talking about understanding the reasons for why they would behave the way they are. If you don't want to listen to my version of it, go to Professor John Mearsheimer. He's out of University of Chicago, very articulate guy, very knowledgeable about international relations. Go listen to him, John Mearsheimer. Or go to Scott Ritter, or Colonel Douglas Macgregor, or economist Jeffrey Sachs, or any number of people that see this thing for what it is and see what the U.S. is really doing. And listen, if we were the good guys, I would say it. I would be praising us if we were doing we're doing all the wrong things, in my opinion. So if you're somebody who still believes the narrative that the U.S. puts out against Putin, you've been misled. You've eaten the propaganda, just like I used to too. I used to be like, he can't be a good guy. He's got to be horrible, right? Because it's just crammed down our throats 1 trillion times. So do your own research. Don't believe a word I say. I'm just some guy on the internet talking on the phone, or, I'm just a guy. But I think if you do your research, if you spend the time, and listen to his interviews. Oliver Stone went over the course of 4 years and got like 16 hours of interviews. It's available on Showtime, or I think you can buy it online for like $12 or something like that. Watch those interviews. They cover all these issues. In fact, they're a little more entertaining than the way that tonight was kind of dry. I thought, I was thinking to myself, unless you're a political junkie, there's no way I could sit through this stuff. It's just a little too, just boring, quite frankly. But I'm glad he did that. And I think that because he has such a amazing reach in terms of his audience, I don't know how many views it's going to get, but it must have been a lot, because there was a lot of anticipation of this and a lot of people are going to watch it. So hopefully people get a clue. We have to start waking up our fellow citizenry. It may still be too late. I kind of think it is, but you never know. Maybe people are going to get fired up and want to organize. I've heard people talking on TikTok saying, I'm done. I'm sick of my money being sent outside the country. I can't take the idea of funding this G-side in Israel. It's just disgusting. I'm not paying my damn taxes anymore. This is not me talking. This is what people are saying on TikTok. I'm just not going to do it. F the government. If they're going to take the money and do those, they don't deserve to get it, right? You hear a lot of that going on right now. And a lot of people eventually, I think, are going to get mad on a number of other levels. They're like, I'm not buying this shit anymore. I'm not going to corporate store A, B, and C and spending my money on that shit. I'm going to go find some other way to get stuff, or just not buy shit. Right? Somebody says, I find Tucker a MAGA supremacist. I think that's what you're trying to say. Well, you don't have to like the guy. And you did an interview tonight. You can just look at the questions that were asked and the responses that were given and forget about the person. He's just a delivery mechanism. But I don't think I think he's woken up. And I don't agree with everything the guy says. I don't agree with what everybody says. But he's a sure sight better than any other journalist that I've seen on the national stage that I can think of, who's got that kind of reach. Who's better? Somebody on MSNBC? Rachel Maddow? Nope. She's a cheerleader for warmongering. She might as well get a stamp of approval from the military-industrial complex, a badge of honor from the war state. She's horrible. She's a paid propagandist. And she might even believe that shit. I don't even know what she really believes. But trust me, she's paid a ton of money to parrot CIA and NSA talking points on the air constantly. So I don't think he's a supremacist. I think he's a privileged white dude, right? Obviously. Just like I'm not quite as privileged as he is, but I'm probably in the same general, cloth to be cut from. What's his view on Muslim people? I've never heard him speak to it, but I would imagine he's like any other group of people, just they're people. And there's extremists in every group, and I'm sure he's not from Islamic extremism and people who are doing things to harm other people, like I think most people are. But you can look it up, I guess. I've never heard him make a comment directly on it. Yeah, all these Western media outlets that purport to be progressive, like NPR, Washington, all these different public, it's all garbage. It's all garbage. If you believe in any of that stuff, you're being misled. And I know that sounds harsh, right? How can this? No, everything is garbage. If it's corporate run, it is garbage. You may not know this, but Reuters and the Associated Press, that's not news. That's Western sanitized reporting. And it's supposed to be the news, like the Associated Press, and those stories are supposed to be raw, unedited stories that are just like, this is what happened, right? By physical reality. Nope. They're narrative driven. Everything's narrative driven. And a lot of stuff is lied by omission. They just don't tell us. They just don't tell us. We just don't get the full story. And that happened in Israel, and it happened in Ukraine, and it's going to happen again. Anytime the U.S. wants to justify any foreign action. By the way, how many people see front page news that the Americans have 5,600 troops in Syria? Hardly ever talked about, right? But they're there. How many people knew there was a base in northwest Jordan, near the border of Iraq? How many people knew that? Probably nobody, right? Because it's supposed to be clandestine. That's the U.S. They just have shit everywhere. And so, listen, eventually your number comes up. People, it's just like they had enough of the bullshit, man. They just kind of, I think the world's kind of had it with the U.S. is my take. Now, I don't think the U.S. is going to go down without a fight. They're going to try like hell to save the empire and try to keep it from changing over. So it's not going to happen overnight, right? But it's probably going to involve conflict, unfortunately, or it's going to involve economic disaster, or probably some combination of the two. But the biggest thing that I worry about, there's two things that I think are most concerning. Number one is nuclear weapons. That's my biggest fear. I think if you listen to me talk about Diane Sare, the Senate candidate for the state of New York that I support, that's one of the main reasons I support her. She's trying to get that whole issue like, dude, guys, you're talking some things you shouldn't be saying. You're just too cavalier about this. And then, of course, and from my point of view, the reason the economy is so messed up is because of central banking. We have this private organization called the Federal Reserve, which is not federal. And they're running the show. They make a ton of money off it. It's owned by private member banks and private high net worth people. Probably about 15 or 20 entities make up the ownership of that entity. And it doesn't have the American people at its interest at heart. So I'm for breaking that up too. Now that's a big one. So I don't think that's going to happen. But yeah, these are all problems. So unless we have a guest that wants to come up, I just wanted to do a quick summary tonight. I did a live today for a couple hours, and I got to get some other stuff done. I got to finish uploading lives recently, and I got a few other things to do work-wise. So if anybody has any questions or wants to come up, I'm happy to do it. Otherwise, I'm probably going to shut things down and get some sleep tonight for once. Get some good sleep. We have one person in the queue. Okay. I build better than I think it says your dad. Hello?
Hello?
Hello.
I can't hear you. I'm gonna have to drop and come back. Hold on.
Okay.
Something's wrong with my phone.
All right. Yeah, sometimes when you come onto a live, I've had this happen before. When I come on as a guest, the volume stops. So I have to leave TikTok and come back. Sheila, happy to do it? Yeah, Jim, I need it bad. I'm getting worn out. I gotta take like a week off or something. I'm definitely not feeling great. And I love doing this. That's the thing. I want to keep doing it, but I think I need to just accept the fact that I'm older now. I need to take a little break. Can you hear now?
Hello?
Can you hear me now?
How are you?
Okay. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I don't know. It's not working again.
Okay. Maybe you can get it figured out. A lot of times what you have to do is actually turn off your internet and then come back on after you do like airplane mode or something like that. Hello from Italy. Great. Just what part of Italy? I wonder if you're in the north or the south or somewhere in the middle. But yeah, it's a country I haven't been to. I lived in Europe for about a year and a half, 2 years in Germany, and I never went to Italy. I really regret it. So I'd like to go. I wonder if I shouldn't just start traveling, like pack up my stuff and get somebody to take care of Ruby and just spend whatever time I have left traveling a little bit. I need rest and green smoothies. I agree. I've been eating some crappy food lately, like some chocolate and some other stuff that I shouldn't be eating. That and cornbread, which I love. Cornbread tastes so good, but it's not great for the love handles, right? Somebody says he wish he could go to. By the way, yeah, someone says they wish they could go to Syria. Damascus is amazing. If you ever heard Richard Medhurst talk about Damascus, somebody's asking me what I think about Biden's remarks. I haven't seen them yet, so I'll probably see them soon if I go onto YouTube, which I normally do while I'm getting ready to go to bed. I just play something in the background. Okay, we have the same person, I Build Better Than You, that wants to come on. Let's see if he's able to connect this time. Any better? Any better? I Build Better? It says, I build better than your dad.
Yeah, now I hear you.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm glad you got your stuff worked out. So
Yeah.
what's on your mind?
So what do you think about Putin? Have you seen Tucker?
Yeah, well, we just finished talking about that for like the last half an hour, but I'll happily repeat it. Like anybody else, he's a leader and he has the interests of his country at heart. And he has his negotiating positions and his concerns that, in a lot of cases, unfortunately clash with the United States. But I think that the unfortunate thing is that he has done some things to reach out over many years to try to make, conciliatory connections with the U.S. and the West. And he's pretty much been spit on, which is unfortunate because I think things could be a lot better than they are now. But and my biggest concern as a human being right now, I think the worst short-term risk is nuclear war. And the Russians, as he said in the interview, have hypersonic technology for weapons that we can't stop.
What do you think of America as a whole?
Well, I think America's a beautiful country. I think it's got a lot of amazing principles. It's got a lot of great people. I think the government has done things over the last 5 decades that are very harmful to the average constituent. I think people don't understand it very well, and they're angry about their standard of living slipping because of inflation and other pressures. And I think that we're in the midst of a future that's going to be very tumultuous.
Would you consider yourself a patriot?
No, I care about the well-being of everybody here, but I'm not patriotic towards the nation state. I believe in the principles of the Constitution, and I think that the republic, when it functions the way it's supposed to, would work marvelously. It's just drifted too far from that and it's been co-opted in a way that I don't believe the founders envisioned, and therefore we find ourselves in quite a predicament that all aspects of the republic are locked up in such a way that the normal mechanisms to get it back in realignment are not available to the constituents.
What do you think about the immigration problem?
Well, we're covering a lot of ground here. We'll tic-tac around. I don't know enough about it except for the fact that what I've observed is that there are a lot of military-age males coming from a lot of different countries, whereas normally it's like Central America and Mexico. I don't know exactly what the reason is why so many are being allowed to come in, although I have my guesses, but I don't have any confirmation of that. But I think it's concerning when you have an influx of so many males between the ages of 18 and 35 that who knows? And again, I'm not against people coming here for a better life. Most of our families came here at some point. That's how we got here. But so for humanitarian reasons and for being compassionate, I think immigration should be as liberal as it can be. But I also think when you're bringing in tens of thousands of undocumented men, it's good to screen some people so you make sure you're not causing yourself some unnecessary problems.
What about immigrants in general before the past 2 years?
Immigrants in general?
Yeah, are you pro immigrants immigrating illegally or not?
Well, I'm not pro anybody doing anything illegally. I think that obviously it's been something that's been happening. Like I said, to the extent that it's people who are fleeing violence or political persecution, or even to some extent want a better economic life, I can't blame them. And a lot of times the political situations that they're fleeing from were caused by policies of the United States, which destabilized their countries, which created the circumstances in which they had to flee. So in that regard, I think it's only fair for us to consider helping people who we created their own fleeing from their country. But I don't have an opinion on quote unquote to see everybody have a chance to live a good life as best they can. Obviously, you just don't want to have total chaos. And for these border cities that have to deal with it, I feel badly for them that they're the ones who have to encounter the difficulties that immigration poses.
Let me ask you, what do you think about Israel as a whole?
Well, we're getting into some very, very, very broad issues at the end of a very long live. I was happy to answer a couple questions, but that's a lengthy conversation. My general sense about Israel, I'll be quick, is that I love the fact that there's a homeland for people who need to be free from persecution. I think that's great. The way it was founded, unfortunately, caused a lot of harm to people, which I don't think is great. And the inequities that have followed, I think, are reprehensible. And Israel tries to justify it based on its security, but I think it takes a lot of license with regard to that to do a lot more harm than good. And I think with what they're doing now, they're shooting themselves in the foot, even though they say they're pursuing their security. This appears to be a pretext to accelerate their long-term plan to dispossess Palestinians of some or all of their remaining territory. And I think that's wrong, but that's their goal. And from their point of view, they probably think they're right. I just have a different narrative, different view of things than those who support Israel.
So wait, what do you see a perfect solution?
There isn't one.
So what would be the best solution in your opinion? What would be a
Well, it's not.
solution that would satisfy?
Yeah, it's not about satisfying me. It's about Palestinians, and it's up to them to decide what works for them. But I think what would make the most sense and could possibly be worked out if it were practical, which I don't think it is for the borders to be shifted back before 1967, for the contiguous territory that goes from the Jordan River to the 1967 borders in the West Bank, and the territory of Gaza in its totality being granted to the Palestinians for a single state. All the settlers and settlements inside of the West Bank to go. That would be fair. I don't think that's going to happen, but I think that would be the only way to make this work, because that's not going to happen. And because a single state solution leaves the Israelis in a position where there's close to an Arab majority, or there will be, they won't accept that. That's why I said there's no likely solution, unfortunately. So I think what's happened to date is going to continue in some fashion. Hopefully it's done in the least damaging way. But with the U.S. supporting it, with arms, politically at the UN, etc., I don't see anything changing until that changes.
Interesting. Let me ask you one more thing before you drop. What do you think about black people, or do they trigger you?
I think that there are things about parts of the experiences that happen in certain smaller groups of people in certain ways that are troubling. I think that the vast majority of people of color and all groups of people are great people. And they're very nice and they're very pleasant and you have good interactions and they do the same things as everybody else. There's no difference. So that's what I think.
Do they trigger you though?
No, absolutely not.
Oh, interesting. Okay, that's cool. That's good to hear.
Yeah. And if you have the ability to put me in front of a polygrapher or a polygraph test, and you had a neural link and you were able to tap into my head, you'd see the exact same response. It's just the way it is. Unfortunately for me, I did some things that were really not advisable the way I communicated, and I did it more than once, which was very short-sighted, stupid, idiotic, and I have to deal with the repercussions of that. But that's not where my heart is, and of course, it's not something I spend a lot of time involved in. So
You
it's
see yourself as an
unfortunate,
activist?
I don't know. I see myself as an analyst, and I can be active on certain issues. I've worked on things like trying to get smoke out of public bars and restaurants. I worked on that. I worked on the 2004 John Kerry campaign against George W. Bush. I've worked on local political issues where I live at both the state and
But
local
do you think
level.
you're a
But as far as
positive
an activist,
activist? Do you think you're
listen, it's not about positivity. I mean, everyone has a different take. So one person could say that their activism is positive. I could say that. It's just about perspective. I try to advocate for things that I believe is right, but I don't. My point of view is my point of view. So it's not about positivity. I think that I just try to do what I can that matters to me.
All right. So what's it called?
Thanks for being here. I appreciate you being here. Thanks. That was like I think 17 questions. I did as best I could to answer them quickly. Okay, we'll do interactive Brian, and we got to go in a few minutes here.
Hi, man. How you doing, Chip? How are you? Long time, bro.
Yeah, it's been a while. How
I'm
you been?
wonderful, man. Living the dream, living the American dream. So what's up with you?
Just finishing our observation of the Putin interview and having a little reflection. Of course, I just got the the Jeopardy 20 questions, so I did my best to answer that one.
So you finish up watching the interviews of Putin?
Yeah, we just finished. A lot of us were. We were just finished watching it about a half hour ago, maybe 45 minutes.
So what do you think about his meeting, his interviews?
Well, it was a good interview. I think Tucker did a good job asking some good questions. We got to hear the Russian president's view of both the history and some of the more recent history, and understanding his concerns as far as the events in Ukraine and as far as the
So
interaction with the U.S.
do you think that he's gonna come into the diplomatic note to solve this hassle?
I'm not sure what you just asked. Who's going to come in diplomatically?
The Putin gonna come into the diplomatic note to solve this?
You mean as far as what we're seeing in Israel,
Yeah,
Palestine?
exactly. No, I'm talking
No.
about the Ukraine and Russia too.
Well, I think he wants to. I think that's the whole point, is that he's tried to, both very early in the conflict, before the conflict happened, as well as during the conflict, and he just doesn't have a partner to do it with. The U.S. does not want to engage diplomatically. It wants to keep sending weapons. It wants to keep the conflict going for a variety of reasons that interest
Yeah.
the United States.
That's the problem. The United States is the problem for Putin to come into the diplomatic note, because we don't want this war to stop. I don't know. I don't know what is going on with the Biden. So that is his conspiracy theory, or I don't know what it's called politically, but we still want Putin to come into the diplomatic note, but still we are the problems here.
Well, when you say we, I think it's the American government. And
Yeah,
the
I'm talking
permanent-
about the American government. We represent the government,
Yeah,
not as
just
a
want to
particular
make sure we're
person. Yeah.
talking about the same thing. Yeah, it's not just the government too, it's also industry, because the money that gets allocated for Ukraine doesn't really go to Ukraine for the most part. It goes to US weapons manufacturers. And then of course the wealthiest people in the world have the largest financial interest in those same companies.
So, what are your thoughts on Budapest memorandum that has been done with the Ukraine?
Say, what memorandum?
The Budapest memorandum.
I'm not sure.
You are not sure about it? Okay.
No.
We'll discuss about it sometimes later in the
Okay.
next live. So, all right, that was it. So I'm
Thanks,
gonna watch
Brian.
that interview. Where did you get that interview from? Like the Putin's
It
interview?
it was posted it's on Tucker Carlson's website, which is tuckercarlson.com.
Okay.
Or it'll probably be posted on YouTube by a lot of people. If you go onto YouTube and just type in Putin interview, I'm sure you'll see.
How long is the interview like?
I think it was an hour and 45 minutes. No, maybe longer, maybe 2 hours and 45 minutes. It was lengthy. No, it wasn't 2 hours. It was probably an hour, probably 2 hours, I think it was. I remember exactly. 2 hours and 10 minutes, Nancy's saying. So 130 minutes.
Oh,
All right, Brian.
130 minutes. Okay, probably gonna take me like 2 days to watch to
Okay,
finish
well,
up.
good luck with that, Brian. Thanks for being here. So there we go. So it's been nice having everybody here tonight. A little bit of an after party after the interview. Curious to hear your thoughts maybe in the coming lives if you want to talk more about it. That's my feedback, and we'll see. I just hope better things could come to bear. I would like to see the U.S. reach out and have. At least we can do right now is stop sending more money for arms. If you were Vladimir Putin and you see an adversary who says they don't want to talk, and they're going to keep sending money to your adversary, and you don't even want to fight them anymore. You just want to be done with this shit. But it's like, if you're going to keep doing this, we're going to keep doing it too. We can't let you, get the upper hand. So that's it for tonight. Thanks for being here, everybody. This will be archived. I record all these things. I don't know whether or not I can upload the video to my YouTube or my Rumble. I got to find that out for copyright reasons, but it sounds like everyone else is doing it. So in the early parts of the broadcast, I think I had my earpiece in, and so people weren't able to hear because I was like 10 feet away. So, but then I switched it. But the first 10 minutes was a lot of the history, which I think most people don't care about, like going back to 1300 and stuff like that. So that's the deal. Everybody have a great night. I will see you tomorrow night at 8 p.m. for the next live. Thanks a lot.